Hello guys, and welcome back to another cold episode. On today's episode, we are talking about the TCG, and more specifically, what the best decks are going to be in the TCG come the newest set, which I believe is called Info. I'm not entirely too aware of what it's actually called. But with the new Fiendsmith stuff being guaranteed that we're getting the link to that actually allows the Fiendsmith stuff to actually work, as well as with Ritual Beast and the Ubel stuff and all of that jazz. No, I think the Ubel, yeah. With all of that stuff coming out, I figured, hey, I'd just toss my hat in the ring. I don't really play the TCG too much, and but I do keep up with it a little bit. So take everything I say with a grain of salt. And this is obviously a predictive list, so I don't know for certain what is going to be the best deck. This is going to be an assumption. I could be very wrong, and I probably will be wrong on a few things here or there. I don't know how wrong, but we'll see. So yeah, here are the tiers. We have tier 0, tier 1, tier 2, rogue, and everything else. Basically, tier 0, I think you know what it is. Tier 1 is a lot of this deck will show up in Top Cut. Tier 2 is some of this deck will show up in Top Cut in big events. Rogue is every once in a while, or 1 to 2 of Top Cut spots will be this deck, or every once in a while it'll show up, stuff like that. And then everything else is basically everything else. Maybe it'll show up in Top Cut, not likely though. So yeah. Let's start off with Tearlament. Tearlament is a great definition of a rogue deck. It shows up occasionally from time to time. It does fairly well, but it's not insane. But it is fairly consistent. It's still able to kind of top, and I don't really see that changing. I do think the metagame gets a little bit stronger overall, but I don't think it's enough to really push tier out of rogue, at the very least. But yeah, for the most part, it's not really doing a whole lot. But 3 per Rhino is pretty good. Next up, we have Branded. Branded, I'm going to firmly put in tier 2. I think it's very strong. It has the ability to get those consistent tops. In fact, it took the most recent... Was it a YCS? It was a national. One of the really big nationals. I think it was like Italy or something like that. I forget what it was. But it was very strong. It did a lot. And was able to really clean... No, I think it was somewhere in Europe. Anyway, it was very easy... it was able to... cleanly win the finals as well, and just do a whole bunch of stuff like that. Still doing the gimmick puppet lock and all of that jazz. Yeah, I was thinking about doing a ban list prediction video or something along those lines, but the thing is, I don't think we're getting a ban list, which is why I wanted to do this instead. So keep that in mind. If Branded were to be hit, it would have to be Albion. Albion's like the only thing that they could hit, and that would be nice, because at the very least, then you don't get gimmick puppet locks or any other sort of lock like Ito or Ra's Disciple or something silly like that. Next up, we have Centurion. Centurion is just bad right now. Doesn't really do anything, doesn't really get consistent tops without Calamity. It doesn't really have the gas to really push through a bunch of the other decks. So there's that. Next up, we have Fiendsmith Chimera, which is a deck that does exist and is definitively rogue. It's not very good, mostly due to the Chimera stuff. Yes, you could do the Fiendsmith stuff, and now you can like dump stuff with Beatrice and all of that jazz, which is great, but every other deck is also going to be doing that, and more specifically, every deck is going to be prepared for that interaction, or dealing with the Fiendsmith stuff, which means that most likely, if you are using that to potentially prop yourself up, you're probably going to be hit by a lot of the cards that people are preparing for that engine. So there's that. Dark World just doesn't really do much. It kind of spins its wheels and doesn't really do a whole lot. It loses to itself more so than it loses to anything else, and it does lose to itself more than wins. So you're just more likely to not win. You'd have to get pretty lucky, honestly, and hope that people aren't like main decking or side decking Droll or anything like that. So it's just unlikely. Dragon Link. Dragon Link's kind of hard to place, because in my mind it's still a fairly decent deck and it still has the capability of topping and doing well, but it hasn't in a long time. Even though it won the most recent World Championship, since then it hasn't really done much. So I'm gonna put it in everything else. It's probably a little bit No, I'm just going to put it in everything else. It just hasn't showed up. Next up, we have Drytron. Drytron hasn't been doing anything right as of recently. It's like a turn skip auto, big combo deck that just kind of auto wins. However, if it doesn't get to do that, which there's like a million ways to prevent it from doing that, and with all of the hand traps, it's just unlikely. It's just not very good. So, yeah. Live Twin Fiendsmith. Fiendsmith stuff is good enough for me to just immediately put this in Rogue. Because, yeah, you can just make the Fiendsmith stuff, and it is, a bunch of fiends. In fact, I think they're dark, but I believe some of them are light, so it's not, like, that difficult to actually do the Fiendsmith stuff, if I recall correctly. However, with that being said, like, the Fiendsmith stuff by itself is not enough to make a deck, and with the Live Twin stuff, it's helpful, but not enough, I would say, to necessarily, like, push it that much higher. Yeah. I could be wrong. I don't know too much about this deck in particular, and what it ends on, or like what it ultimately does, because again, this is kind of new, right? We never really saw this in the OCG, or I haven't seen it in the OCG, so I don't really know relatively what it does. Next up, we have Lightsworn, which I believe Lightsworn is actually pretty well positioned in the metagame. It just does pretty well. It's consistent. It has the ability to kind of play through hand traps while also playing a bunch of hand traps, and yeah, it's fairly solid. Although now that I think about it, it's definitely not tier 2, because I don't think it's had like any results. Yeah, the more that I think about it, the worse it gets. I feel like this deck is really strong, but I actually don't think it's done all that much in like top events. So there's that. Next up, we have Fire King. The thing with Fire King is you're only ever going to play it with the Fire King Snake Eye stuff, and that is pretty good. It's not the end-all be-all. It does have major weaknesses as opposed to like the regular Snake Eye stuff, where it can't play as many hand traps, and it has the big weakness to like Cosmic Cyclone, which matters a lot more in a side deck style format. So it's not really going to be that prevalent, but I still think it's very, very strong. Next up, Flu. Flu's a standard rogue deck. It's Flu. It does Flu stuff. Activates Shifter. Cool. I don't know what deck this is supposed to be. That's Ice Barrier. I believe Infernoids are getting a few new cards. I don't know how much it will help the deck per se. Do I put this in Rogue? I'm gonna put it in Rogue. I don't know if it necessarily goes there, but I'm going to put it in Rogue for now. Reason being, in Rogue, or the reason it's in Rogue is due to the fact that all of the what are these called? They're not Infernobles. They are Infernoids. There we go. Infernoids. All of the Infernoids have a banish effect, which is pretty good. It deals with some of the metagame, like Branded and Fire King and some of the other cards, but not all that much. Kashtira doesn't really do anything as a deck by itself. The engine, however, if we're talking about the engine, it's much higher, but the deck itself isn't really doing a whole lot. So there you go. I'll just put it in Rogue for now. Labyrinth I'm going to put squarely in tier 2. The thing with Labyrinth is that the deck itself does well on like one or two people do really well with it, but it's not something that is a big group of people are topping. So I still think that that's like pretty strong and can. It's never going to win an event, because if it's on the feature match, it will not win. Period. It is cursed. The player will do a misplay that costs them the game, or more likely, the opponent will just top deck Harpy's Feather Duster and kill them, which happens so often. Labyrinth is just cursed. If it gets on the feature match, it just loses. So until it gets all the way to finals without being on the feature match, there you go. Then we have a chance. But yeah, overall Labyrinth, I feel like it's still very good, and just consistently doing well. Not insane, but doing well in a tier 0 metagame. The fact that it's even able to compete does show that it's fairly decent. And I say tier 0, but we'll get into that in a second. Madolche is not really going to do anything, even with the new stuff. I'm going to put Melodious in tier 2 for now. Melodious has a lot going for it. It has really good one-card combos. It has really good two-card extension combos. It has really insane, or it has like a really good engine. It has the ability to play through and with a bunch of hand traps. It's just really, really solid right now. And yeah, it's just a very good, competent deck. Meme is meme. Pendulum is just really bad. Pendulum just doesn't really do anything in Master Duel. Not Master Duel, in the TCG. Pearly Sprite I have seen very rarely, but it has shown up, so I'm going to put it in Rogue. It's decent, mostly due to the Pearly stuff, not due to the Sprite stuff. However, Pearly by itself I think is pretty clearly in... Well, I want to put this in tier 2. It feels bad not putting it in tier 2, because it is such a good deck. It is a really strong deck. Overall. Yeah, it's tier 2. It's tier 2. I'm saying it's tier 2. It's really strong, it's good. Its biggest issue is like time, and having to deal with that in a side deck format where you do have to play really slowly because of just the way that like Pearly inherently plays the game. So overall, like, it's just not really suited for big tournaments and stuff like that. So it doesn't do too well, at least in terms of like results. However, it is still a very strong deck, so I'm gonna put it in tier 2. So yeah, you know, maybe if time doesn't matter as much because you're like at locals or something, it's gonna be better. But anyway, yeah, I don't know. I feel like it's not a rogue deck though. The new Raid Raptor stuff is fairly decent. Yeah, that's kind of it. I'm gonna put you higher. Rescue Ace is Rescue Ace and can still play the game, still plays the Snake Eye stuff. It's okay. Yeah, that's basically it. Rika, Rogue. I kind of want to put it lower, but like it does top and win events. Here's the thing with Rika, or more specifically Plant Link. It's not good, but European players do not know how to play against this deck. They've just like, it wins events and then they just forget that it exists, and then it comes back and wins again, and you're like, how did we forget? Europe's just free. It's that simple. Yeah, it really is. So there you go. However, some of the best players are also like hard solo decking this deck, which also makes it fairly good. Ritual Beast. I'm gonna put it right here for now. Ritual Beast is really good right now. It does the same thing that Melodious does, or Snake Eye does, just like slightly weaker. So yeah, it's just very strong. It has a fairly decent end board. Actually, hold on. I am overrating this. I know for a fact I'm overrating this. I'm gonna put it here. It's pretty good. Yeah, it's just like a solid option right now. There you go. Runic Stun is not very good. I know it's topped a few events, so I guess I'll put it in Rogue for now. But it's not like doing anything too interesting. It's not something that you should like inherently be preparing for. Have some side deck options for spell trap removal at the very least, and you should be fine. I don't think there's like a deck in particular, or yeah, there's not like a deck in particular that just hard loses to this. I think it's just, yeah, you can side deck against this and it's fine. It's not really just like, anyway, you get the point. Salamangreat's fine, I guess. You know, it's fine. Voiceless Voice, I'm gonna put here for now, and we'll discuss a few things in a second. We'll get to Snake Eye at the end. I'll just throw this in here. White Woods isn't gonna do anything with its first wave of support. We'll get to Tenpai as well, and Yubel. I want to talk about all of these at the end. Runic for higher sprites, fine. It's not really going to do anything. Sprite's pretty good. Put it like here-ish. It's good. Yeah. Unchained just kind of doesn't do anything. by itself. You can play it with like the Labyrinth engine and basically be like, oh cool, I'm gonna do my Labyrinth stuff and then, you know, go into Yama to do stuff like that. But that's more of just like an engine. The deck itself is really hindered by Sharvara being at 1. So there's that. Okay, now Snake Eye. Right now it's technically tier 0. However, because of the power level of the metagame, I think being increased, without Snake Eyes itself being part of that increased power level, I know like, oh, but Fiendsmith. Like, it's going to get Fiendsmith. The thing is, the reason Fiendsmith is seeing play in the OCG is because you don't have as many cards available to you in the Snake Eye engine. You have, I think, 2 Ash, you have 1 Wanted, and I think like Kieran and stuff like that is also limited. And then they also have to deal with like Maxi and stuff like that. So the consistency of the deck is hindered, which means that playing the Fiendsmith stuff is better, right? And so the Fiendsmith archetype, I would say, or like the Fiendsmith engine is probably going to be tier 0, similar to the Adventure engine being tier 0 when that came out, right? However, Snake Eye, I don't think is going to be definitively tier 0. I think it will be the best deck in the room, and I think it will be definitively the best deck. But I don't think it will be so far and away, so far and above everything else, that it will be a tier 0 meta threat, right? And the main reason for this is because of the next 2 decks with Tenpai and Yubel, in that order. Tenpai just does Tenpai things. It OTKs really efficiently. It has the ability to play a whole bunch of hand traps and board breakers and stuff like that. It becomes unaffected. It kind of just doesn't care. And the side deck and the side decking pattern that it generates makes it very difficult to kind of deal with, right? So it's very strong overall. And just a solid deck. And it can compete, as we have seen through like nationals formats and stuff like that. It still can compete very convincingly with Snake Eye. It's not definitively the best deck, but as more and more decks kind of come into the fold, and more decks become like decks you have to prepare for, Tenpai gets better, right? Because people can't solely prepare for things like Tenpai and Snake Eye. Now you have to prepare for a third option, which is Yubel. And Yubel with the Fiendsmith stuff, as well as with the Fiend Link stuff, and all of that shenanigans going on, this deck will be very good. I don't know if it will necessarily fully compete with the Snake Eye stuff, but I do want to show you one thing, which is that in the OCG, it is actually the best deck. Alright, so here we are on Road of the King, and as you can see, Yubel is technically the best deck in the metagame with the Fiendsmith stuff. So Fiendsmith Yubel is more or less definitively the best in the metagame, and we can see this through multiple of these. It's not so far and away that it is, you know, steaming everyone and just really very far ahead. It's just kind of barely ahead. But even with that being said, it is still the best deck. So with that in mind, and with the hits to Snake Eye, I still think Snake Eye is the best deck, but Yubel has that that ability to kind of be that that like second best deck in the room, force more people to kind of interact with that as well, which you kind of do interact with it the same way with a bunch of hand traps, but that doesn't necessarily do that well against like Tenpai, right? In fact, it helps Tenpai. Now you have 2 decks that die to hand traps, to a whole bunch of different hand traps, or a whole bunch of hand traps, while they also play a whole bunch of hand traps that don't really do well into Tenpai, right? So all of this kind of like boosts some of the other strategies while pulling Snake Eye down. I still think Snake Eye is going to be a large percentage of Top Cut, and yeah, there's that. So yeah, all in all, I think this is pretty much it. Again, I could be wrong. You know, Yubel could just randomly crash and burn and not work, which would be surprising. Tenpai could do significantly worse, and all of a sudden everyone just figure out the matchup and understands how it works. And or maybe, you know, a whole bunch of people decided, hey, let's give Rika another try, and all of a sudden started to play a whole bunch of Rika games, and all of a sudden it's crazy. But yeah, for the most part, I feel like this is fairly accurate. Yeah. especially with a lot of this stuff down here. I'm not too confident with any of these. These could all change. Like anything down here could move up. I don't know if it could necessarily move up to like tier 2 or anything like that, but there you go. Yeah, all in all, though, I'm gonna move a few things here around just so that people who actually watch the video understand, and people who don't, you know, don't. So yeah, I'm just going to keep blabbering on so that the people who are clicking to the end of the video have to go back and figure out what I was actually talking about with the whole actual metagame and deciding that, no, this is actually accurate. Yes, Sprite is going to be tier 0. They're getting a whole bunch of new cards. It's going to be crazy. And yeah, you should definitely be on the lookout for all of the Sprite variants. Sprite Per League in particular gets a massive boost. I don't know if it'll be better than regular Sprite, but yeah, like even with that being said, Snake Eye's still going to be competitive, obviously, and there you go. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. Let me know down below what you guys think, and remember to always stay frosty. Bye-bye. Shout out to the Frost Guard, my members. Thank you guys so much for the support, and I hope you enjoy the content.